The poor girl begged for a toy doll. The lonely CEO froze. My daughter died before I gave her one. The sterile hospital room hummed with the quiet desperation of machines keeping hope alive, their rhythmic beeping a mechanical heartbeat that counted down moments too precious to waste. Alistair Croft sat beside the narrow bed where his 7-year-old daughter Sophie lay, her small frame dwarfed by the crisp white sheets that seemed to swallow her whole. Her once golden hair had grown thin from treatments, but her eyes still held that spark of wonder that made his heart break and soar simultaneously. The afternoon light filtered through the hospital window, casting dancing shadows on the wall where get-well cards from her classmates created a colourful mosaic of childhood innocence. Sophie's tiny fingers traced the glossy pages of a toy catalogue he had brought to distract her from the endless parade of doctors and nurses, the constant prick of needles, the weight of uncertainty that hung over them like a storm cloud that refused to break. She paused on a particular page, her breath catching in a way that made Alistair lean closer, desperate to capture every moment of joy in this place where joy felt like a rebellion against fate itself. There, printed in vibrant colours, was an exquisite porcelain doll with cascading auburn curls, dressed in an emerald velvet gown that seemed to shimmer even on the flat page. The doll's painted blue eyes held a lifelike quality that made it seem as though she might step right out of the catalogue and into Sophie's arms. "Look, Daddy," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible above the machine's steady rhythm. "Isn't she the most beautiful thing you've ever seen?" The doll's delicate features reminded Alistair of Sophie herself, the same heart-shaped face, the same gentle expression that could light up any room. "Her name is Isabella," Sophie continued, already weaving stories around this porcelain princess. "And she lives in a castle made of moonbeams, where every day is a tea party with unicorns and fairy godmothers." Alistair felt his throat tighten as he watched his daughter's imagination transform the sterile hospital room into a magical kingdom, her fever-bright eyes sparkling with dreams that felt both infinite and terrifyingly fragile. Without hesitation, without considering the cost or the logistics, he made a promise that would echo through the corridors of his heart for years to come. "Baby girl," he said, taking her small hand in his much larger one, feeling how delicate her bones had become. "As soon as you get better and come home with Daddy, Isabella will be waiting for you in your room, I promise." Sophie's smile was radiant, brighter than all the machines and monitors combined, and she squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left, sealing a pact between father and daughter that transcended the medical charts and grim prognoses that haunted his sleepless nights. If you've ever made a promise to someone you love, a promise that carries the weight of hope and desperation, then you understand the sacred bond between parent and child. Subscribe to Love Reunion Stories to witness how we honor the memory of those who fill our hearts with light, even when they're no longer here to see it shine. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of medical consultations, experimental treatments, and false hopes that rose and fell like tides against the rocky shore of reality. Sophie grew weaker, but her belief in the promise never wavered, and she would often ask when Isabella would arrive, her voice growing softer with each passing day, until it became barely more than a whisper carried on shallow breaths. Alistair spent every moment he could by her side, reading stories, singing lullabies from his own childhood, and painting elaborate pictures of the adventures she and Isabella would have once she came home. He described tea parties in secret gardens, midnight conversations about dreams and wishes, and shopping trips to buy matching dresses that would make them look like sisters. The doctors spoke in hushed tones about quality of life and making comfortable choices, but Alistair refused to hear their carefully veiled warnings, clinging instead to the image of Sophie dancing with her porcelain companion in the safety of their home. On a Tuesday morning, when autumn rain painted teardrops on the hospital windows, Sophie's breathing became laboured, and the machines began their urgent chorus of alarms that brought nurses running and doctors conferring in worried clusters. Alistair held her hand as she slipped away, her last words a barely audible whisper about Isabella waiting for her somewhere beyond the pain, somewhere where tea parties lasted forever and every day was filled with magic. The funeral was a blur of black suits and whispered condolences, of relatives who tried to offer comfort with words that felt hollow against the enormity of his loss. The house felt impossibly large and quiet, without Sophie's laughter echoing through the halls, and Alistair threw himself into his work with the intensity that bordered on obsession, building walls of meetings and mergers around the crater where his heart used to be. 5 years passed like seasons viewed through frosted glass, each day blending into the next in a monotonous parade of corporate success that felt meaningless against the backdrop of his personal devastation. Alistair had built his company into an empire, his name spoken with reverence in boardrooms across the country. But success tasted like ash when there was no one waiting at home to celebrate his victories or comfort his defeats. His penthouse apartment was a monument to achievement and a mausoleum of memories, filled with expensive art and furniture that no one touched, no one admired, no one spilled juice on during impromptu tea parties. The porcelain doll, Isabella, sat in a place of honor on Sophie's untouched dresser, still in her original box, a beautiful promise that would never be fulfilled. A reminder of how life can change in the space between one heartbeat and the next. On this particular evening, as November rain drummed against the windows of his downtown office, Alistair finally allowed himself to acknowledge the weight of exhaustion that had settled into his bones, the hollow ache that no amount of work could fill. His secretary had gone home hours ago, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the city lights that twinkled like distant stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The building was quiet, except for the hum of elevators and the distant sound of traffic far below, and Alistair realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd simply walked without purpose, breathed without agenda, existed without the armor of corporate responsibility. He gathered his coat and briefcase, moving through the empty halls like a ghost haunting his own life, and stepped into the elevator that would carry him down to street level and back into the world of the living. The rain had softened to a gentle mist that hung in the air like suspended silver, turning the streetlights into halos and transforming the city into something ethereal and dreamlike. Alistair walked without direction, his expensive leather shoes clicking against wet pavement as he wandered through streets he normally saw only from the back seat of his company car. The shops were beginning to close, their warm light spilling onto the sidewalk in golden rectangles that promised comfort and community, things that had become foreign concepts in his carefully controlled existence. He paused at a corner where a small toy store glowed like a beacon against the gathering darkness, its window display a wonderland of childhood dreams and innocent desires. The store was called Magical Moments, and its windows were filled with stuffed animals, building blocks, action figures, and games that sparked imagination and wonder in ways that his corporate world had forgotten how to appreciate. But it was the centerpiece of the display that stopped his heart and sent ice water coursing through his veins, freezing him in place as surely as if he had been turned to stone by some ancient curse. There, positioned with loving care behind the pristine glass, was Isabella, the same porcelain doll from the catalogue, the same auburn curls, the same emerald velvet dress, the same painted blue eyes that seemed to hold secrets and stories waiting to be told. And there, pressed against the cold window with her small hands and face creating fog circles on the glass, was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, her dark skin glowing in the store's warm light, her hair gathered in neat braids that framed a face filled with the same wonder and longing that Alistair remembered so well from another child, another time, another lifetime ago. The girl was completely absorbed in her study of the doll, her eyes wide with the kind of pure desire that children feel for something that represents magic and possibility, the bridge between reality and the fairy tales that make life bearable. She traced the outline of the doll through the glass with one finger, her lips moving in a silent conversation with the porcelain princess, weaving stories and dreams that only she could hear. Standing behind her, a woman who was clearly her mother shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, checking her watch and glancing nervously at the price tags visible in the window display, her worn coat and sensible shoes telling a story of hard work and careful budgeting, of dreams deferred and wishes weighed against necessities. The mother placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, and Alistair could read the love and pain in her expression, the terrible mathematics that parents learn when they want to give their children the world, but can only afford to give them hope. "Come on, Maya," the mother said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 small disappointments. "We need to get home for dinner, and I know you like to look, but we've talked about this, sweetheart." Maya pressed her face closer to the glass, her breath creating a larger fog circle that she used like a canvas to trace a heart with her finger, the ephemeral artwork disappearing almost as quickly as it was created. "Can't we just look a little longer, Mama?" Maya pleaded, her voice muffled by the window, but clear enough for Alistair to hear the ache in it. "She's so beautiful, and I bet she's lonely in there all by herself. Maybe if I wish hard enough she'll know that someone loves her." The scene unfolded before Alistair like a movie played in slow motion, every detail etched into his memory with painful clarity. The way the streetlight caught the tears threatening to spill from Maya's eyes, the way her mother's hand trembled slightly as she tried to gently coax her daughter away from the window, the way the doll seemed to stare back at them with those painted eyes that held no judgment, only the eternal patience of inanimate objects waiting to be loved. It was Sophie all over again, the same desperate want, the same impossible longing for something that represented more than just a toy, more than just a doll, something that symbolized love and security and the promise that dreams could come true if you believed hard enough and wished with your entire heart. Alistair felt the years collapse around him, felt himself transported back to that hospital room where he had made a promise to another little girl with the same light in her eyes, the same faith in the power of love to transcend circumstances and make the impossible possible. "My daughter died before I gave her one." The words echoed in his mind like a bell tolling, each syllable a weight that threatened to crush him where he stood, and he realized that in this moment, watching this scene play out on a rain-soaked street, he was being given a chance to honor that promise in a way he never could have imagined. Maya's mother finally succeeded in drawing her away from the window, the little girl casting one last longing look over her shoulder as they disappeared into the crowd of evening commuters, leaving Alistair alone with his memories and a clarity of purpose that cut through 5 years of grief like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Without allowing himself time to second-guess the impulse, Alistair pushed through the door of magical moments, the bell above announcing his arrival with a cheerful chime that seemed almost absurdly optimistic, given the gravity of the moment. The store was warm and inviting, filled with the scent of new toys and the promise of childhood wonder, shelves lined with everything from simple wooden blocks to elaborate play sets that could transport a child to any world their imagination could conjure. The proprietor, a kindly man with silver hair and spectacles that perched on the end of his nose, looked up from arranging a display of board games with the practiced eye of someone who understood that his job was not just selling toys, but selling dreams and possibilities. "Good evening, sir," the man said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had spent decades helping parents navigate the delicate balance between want and need, between budget and love. "Is there something special I can help you find tonight?" Alistair approached the counter with the purposeful stride of a man accustomed to making decisions quickly and definitively, but his voice carried an uncharacteristic tremor when he spoke. a vulnerability that surprised them both. "The doll in your window," he said, pointing toward the display where Isabella sat in her place of honor, "the porcelain princess with the auburn curls and emerald dress. I'd like to purchase her, and I need you to do something very specific with the delivery." The proprietor's eyebrows rose slightly, intrigued by the unusual request and the intensity in Alistair's voice. The way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, as though he were fighting an internal battle that had been raging for years. "There was a little girl here just now," Alistair continued, his words coming faster as the plan crystallized in his mind. 8 years old, beautiful dark skin, braids in her hair. She was with her mother, and they were looking at the doll. "I want you to find them and tell them that they've won a special promotion, that Isabella has been chosen specifically for her, that sometimes magic happens when we least expect it." The store owner studied Alistair's face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people through decades of customer service, seeing past the expensive suit and polished exterior to the raw grief and desperate hope underneath, recognizing the look of a man trying to make peace with ghosts that refused to rest. "That's quite generous, sir," the proprietor said carefully, his voice gentle but probing. "Are you certain about this? It's a considerable expense, and you don't even know these people. What if they ask questions about who their benefactor might be?" Alistair reached for his wallet with hands that shook almost imperceptibly, pulling out a credit card that had no spending limit, that represented the accumulated wealth of years spent building a business empire while his personal life crumbled into dust and memory. "Tell them it's from someone who understands the power of a little girl's dream," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Someone who believes that every child deserves to know that magic is real and love finds a way, even when we can't see how or why or when, and if they press for details. Tell them it's from a father who learned too late that the most important promises are the ones we make to the children who trust us to keep them." The transaction was completed with efficient professionalism, but the store owner's eyes never left Alistair's face, seeing something there that spoke of loss and redemption, of second chances and the terrible beauty of grief transformed into purpose. As Alistair signed the receipt, his signature a flourish of black ink that sealed this strange and sacred transaction, he found himself thinking of Sophie, wondering if somehow, somewhere beyond the reach of hospitals and heartbreak, she might approve of this unexpected turn their story had taken. Should kindness be anonymous to have meaning, or do we perform good deeds because we need witnesses to our own capacity for love? Subscribe to Love Reunion Stories and share your thoughts in the comments below, because sometimes the most profound acts of compassion happen when no one is watching, when the only reward is the peace that comes from honoring promises that transcend time and circumstance. Alistair positioned himself across the street from the toy store, settling into his car with the patience of a man who had learned that some moments are worth waiting for, that some gifts are too precious to be given without witnessing their impact. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving the streets washed clean and reflecting the warm light from shop windows like mirrors laid flat against the earth. And he found himself remembering nights when he had waited outside Sophie's room to watch her sleep, marveling at the peaceful expression on her face and the way her small chest rose and fell with the rhythm of dreams he would never fully understand. 20 minutes passed before he saw them approaching, Maya skipping alongside her mother with the resilient joy that children possess, their conversation animated despite the disappointment of leaving the toy store empty-handed, and Alistair felt his chest tighten with anticipation, and something that might have been hope if he still believed in such things. The store owner emerged just as they reached the familiar window, his face bright with the kind of excitement that comes from being part of something magical, something that restores faith in the possibility that good things can happen to good people for no reason other than the universe occasionally remembers to be kind. The conversation was brief but animated, the store owner gesturing toward the window and then toward Maya, whose expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to pure, radiant joy in the space of heartbeats, her mother's hand flying to cover her mouth as understanding dawned and tears began to flow freely down her cheeks. Maya pressed both hands against the glass again, but this time her touch was different, proprietary and amazed, as though she couldn't quite believe that Isabella was really, truly, finally going to be hers, that dreams sometimes do come true in the most unexpected ways and at the most impossible moments. The store owner unlocked the door and carefully, reverently, lifted Isabella from her place in the window display, carrying her like the precious cargo she had always been, the bridge between one little girl's dream and another little girl's memory, the physical manifestation of love that refuses to be contained by death or time or the cruel mathematics of loss. When Maya's arms closed around the doll, when her face lit up with the kind of pure happiness that adults spend their entire lives chasing but rarely find, Alistair felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the tight knot of grief that had lived there for 5 years, a recognition that Sophie's promise had been kept after all, just not in the way anyone could have anticipated. Maya's mother was crying openly now, clutching the store owner's hand and asking questions that he deflected with gentle mystery, explaining only that sometimes angels walk among us wearing business suits and carrying credit cards. That kindness doesn't always announce itself with fanfare and ceremony, that the most profound gifts often come from strangers who understand pain in ways that friends and family never could. From his vantage point across the street, Alistair watched Maya dance with Isabella in the middle of the sidewalk, spinning in circles that made her coat flutter like wings and her braids fly out in perfect arcs around her head, her laughter carrying across the distance and settling into his heart like a balm for wounds he had thought would never heal. The scene played out like a movie he had directed without knowing it, every frame perfect and heartbreaking and beautiful. And he found himself smiling for the first time in months, maybe years, certainly for the first time since he had sat beside a hospital bed and made a promise to a little girl who would never live to see it fulfilled. But as he watched Maya's joy, as he saw her mother's tears of gratitude and amazement, he realized that the promise had been fulfilled after all, just not in the literal way he had originally intended, and that sometimes the universe has a way of weaving our broken hearts into patterns we never could have imagined, creating meaning from loss and purpose, from pain in ways that defy explanation but demand acceptance. Maya and her mother finally headed home, Maya clutching Isabella against her chest like a treasure beyond price, her steps lighter and her smile brighter than the streetlights that illuminated their path. And Alistair knew that this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of something entirely new and unexpected. That night, alone in his penthouse apartment, with the city spread out below him like a constellation of hopes and dreams, Alistair made a decision that would change the trajectory of both his life and Maya's, though she would never know the extent of his involvement in her future. He spent hours at his computer, researching and planning, using the same methodical approach that had built his business empire to construct something far more personal and meaningful, a legacy that would honor Sophie's memory while ensuring that Maya's story had a different ending than his daughter's had. He hired a private investigator, not to intrude on their privacy, but to understand their circumstances, to learn about Maya's mother, Sarah, who worked 2 jobs to make ends meet, who had dreams of her own that she had set aside to focus on raising her daughter alone, who deserved the kind of help that would lift them both without making them feel like charity cases or objects of pity. The information he gathered painted a picture of quiet dignity and determined hope, of a family that faced their challenges with grace and humor, of a little girl whose imagination and kindness reminded him so powerfully of Sophie that sometimes he had to stop reading the reports because the similarities were almost too much to bear. Working through his lawyers and a carefully constructed network of shell companies and charitable foundations, Alistair began to weave safety nets into Maya's life, invisible supports that would catch her if she fell and lift her when she needed to soar, all designed to look like fortunate coincidences and strokes of good luck, rather than the deliberate interventions of a man trying to rewrite the ending of a story that had broken his heart. Sarah received notification that she had won a housing lottery she had never entered, securing them a modest but comfortable apartment in a better neighborhood with good schools and safe streets, the kind of place where Maya could play outside without fear and dream without limits. The letter explaining her good fortune was professional and bureaucratic, mentioning something about computer-generated selections and random drawings, nothing that would make her suspicious or uncomfortable, just grateful for an unexpected turn of events that would make their lives significantly easier. A few weeks later, Maya's school informed Sarah that her daughter had been selected for a special scholarship program that would cover not just tuition, but also books, supplies, uniforms, and even after-school activities, a comprehensive support system that would ensure Maya had every opportunity to develop her talents and pursue her interests without the financial constraints that had limited so many other bright children from similar circumstances. The scholarship had been established years earlier, the school explained, by an anonymous benefactor who believed that potential should never be wasted due to economic circumstances. And Maya's teachers had unanimously recommended her based on her creativity, kindness, and academic performance, qualities that made her exactly the kind of student the program was designed to support. Each intervention was carefully crafted to appear legitimate and merit-based, the work of someone who understood that true charity preserves dignity while providing opportunity, that the best gifts are the ones that empower rather than create dependence, that help should feel like recognition of worth rather than acknowledgement of need. Alistair watched from a distance as Maya thrived in her new environment, as she made friends and discovered talents she might never have had the chance to explore, as she grew from a little girl pressing her face against toy store windows into a confident young person who believed in her own potential because the world had consistently shown her that dreams could come true with hard work and a little bit of magic. Years passed, like pages turning in a story that Alistair had written but never signed, each chapter bringing new challenges and new victories for Maya and her mother, each milestone carefully supported by invisible hands that ensured success was possible but never guaranteed, that achievement remained meaningful because it required effort and dedication rather than just lucky circumstances. Maya's artistic talents emerged early, nurtured by art classes and supplies that appeared through various programs and opportunities. Her drawings and paintings showing a sophisticated understanding of color and composition that reminded Alistair of Sophie's own creative spirit, the way his daughter had seen beauty in everything around her and tried to share that vision with the world through stories and songs and elaborate games of make-believe. Sarah was accepted into a nursing program at the local community college, her tuition covered by a grant for single mothers pursuing healthcare careers, an opportunity that allowed her to build a more stable and fulfilling career while still being present for Maya's important moments, the delicate balance that every working parent seeks, but few manage to achieve without significant support systems. Maya excelled in school, her natural intelligence supplemented by tutoring programs and enrichment activities that kept her challenged and engaged, her confidence growing with each successful project and positive interaction, her worldview expanding as she was exposed to new ideas and experiences that broadened her understanding of what was possible for someone like her. She kept Isabella close throughout these years, the porcelain doll becoming not just a beloved toy, but a symbol of the magic that had entered her life that rainy night outside the toy store, a reminder that sometimes wishes do come true, and that believing in impossible things is the first step toward making them possible. On quiet evenings, Maya would tell Isabella about her day, sharing her hopes and fears and dreams with the painted blue eyes that had witnessed so many secrets, creating the kind of intimate friendship that children form with inanimate objects that somehow become more real and meaningful than many human relationships. By the time Maya reached her teenage years, she had grown into exactly the kind of young person that Alistair had hoped she would become: confident but not arrogant, ambitious but not ruthless, kind but not naive, possessing the rare combination of intelligence and empathy that makes some people natural leaders and forces for positive change in the world. She had been accepted to one of the city's most prestigious preparatory schools, her admission based entirely on merit and potential, though Alistair's invisible influence had ensured that the financial aid package was generous enough to make attendance possible without creating hardship for Sarah, who had completed her nursing degree and was now working at a respected hospital in a position that provided both personal satisfaction and financial stability. The scholarship Maya received was presented as recognition of her exceptional academic performance and community service record, which included volunteer work at local shelters and mentoring programs for younger children, activities that demonstrated the kind of character and commitment that made her exactly the sort of student the school's anonymous benefactor had envisioned when establishing the fund. On a crisp autumn morning that reminded Alistair of the day he had first seen Sophie's hospital room filled with coloured leaves that seemed to dance against the window, he positioned himself across the street from Maya's new school and watched as she walked through the ornate gates that would open doors to opportunities he could never have imagined when he was her age, when success was something that had to be fought for and earned through determination and luck, rather than systematically cultivated through careful planning and strategic support. Maya walked with the confident stride of someone who belonged exactly where she was, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her head held high, her smile bright as she greeted friends and teachers who recognized her potential and were committed to helping her achieve it. And Alistair felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with business success or financial achievement, and everything to do with the knowledge that he had kept a promise made in a hospital room years ago, just not in the way anyone could have predicted. She had grown beautiful in the way that confident, intelligent young women do, her features reflecting both her mother's strength and her own unique spirit, her eyes bright with curiosity and determination, her laugh carrying the same musical quality that had made Sophie's giggle so infectious and joyful. Maya moved through the world with the kind of ease that comes from believing in your own worth, from having grown up in an environment where dreams were encouraged and potential was nurtured, where setbacks were treated as learning opportunities rather than evidence of inadequacy, where love and support were constants rather than variables dependent on performance or behavior. Watching her disappear into the school building, surrounded by classmates who would challenge and inspire her, taught by teachers who would demand excellence while providing the support necessary to achieve it, Alistair felt a peace that had eluded him for more than a decade, a sense that the circle had been completed in a way that honored both daughters, the one he had lost and the one he had chosen to protect. He never approached Maya directly, never introduced himself or sought recognition for his role in her success, understanding that some gifts are most powerful when they remain anonymous, when the recipient can believe in their own merit rather than feeling obligated to someone else's generosity. The relationship he had built with Maya was one-sided by design, a love that flowed from him to her without expecting or requiring anything in return, the purest form of paternal affection because it was motivated entirely by the desire to see her flourish rather than any need for acknowledgement or gratitude. In his office, alongside the photographs of Sophie that had sustained him through the darkest years, Alistair kept a small collection of Maya's school achievements, newspaper clippings about her academic successes and community service awards, report cards that reflected not just intelligence but character, evidence of a life well lived and a future bright with possibility. Love takes many forms, and sometimes the deepest expression of paternal devotion is the decision to remain in the shadows, to give without expecting recognition, to love without demanding reciprocation. Like and share this story if you believe in the transformative power of anonymous kindness, and subscribe to Love Reunion Stories to explore the countless ways that love transcends traditional boundaries and creates connections that heal both the giver and the receiver. Because sometimes the most profound reunions happen not between people who find each other, but between people who find purpose in loving others from a distance. Isabella still sat on Maya's dresser, no longer the centerpiece of elaborate tea parties, but still a cherished companion, her porcelain features unchanged by the years that had transformed the little girl, who had once pressed her face against a toy store window, into a young woman preparing to change the world through her own unique combination of intelligence, compassion, and determination. The doll had become a talisman of possibility, a reminder that magic exists in the space between wishing and receiving, that sometimes the universe conspires to make dreams come true in ways that restore faith in the fundamental goodness of existence, that love finds a way to express itself even when traditional channels are blocked by grief or circumstance or the cruel randomness of fate. On quiet evenings when Maya was studying or reading, when the house was filled with the comfortable silence of contentment rather than the desperate quiet of want, Sarah would sometimes catch sight of Isabella and remember that rainy night when their lives had changed forever, when a stranger's kindness had opened doors they hadn't even known existed, when hope had been restored by someone who understood that the smallest gestures can have the most profound impact. Maya's mother had never stopped wondering about their mysterious benefactor, had never stopped feeling grateful for the series of fortunate coincidences that had lifted them from uncertainty to security, from dreams deferred to dreams actively pursued, from hoping for better to actually achieving it through hard work supported by unexpected opportunities. She had tried in the early years to investigate the source of their good fortune, but every lead had ended in official letterhead and bureaucratic explanations that revealed nothing about the individual behind the kindness, leaving her to conclude that some angels prefer to remain anonymous, that some gifts are meant to be accepted with gratitude rather than analyzed for motive or meaning. The mystery had become part of their family mythology, a story they told each other about the power of hope and the reality of miracles, proof that goodness exists in the world even when it hides behind corporate structures and legal documents designed to protect the privacy of those who choose to give without seeking credit. As Maya prepared for graduation and began making plans for college, as she considered career paths that would allow her to make a difference in other people's lives the way someone had made a difference in hers, Alistair felt a bittersweet satisfaction that came from knowing he had succeeded in ways that couldn't be measured by stock prices or profit margins or quarterly reports. He had created something more valuable than wealth, more lasting than any business empire, more meaningful than any professional achievement. He had ensured that Sophie's memory lived on through Maya's opportunities, that his daughter's unfulfilled potential had been transformed into another child's realized dreams. that love had found a way to transcend death and create life where only emptiness had existed before. The promise he had made in that hospital room had been kept after all, just not in the literal sense he had originally intended, and he had learned that sometimes the most important commitments we make are the ones that evolve and adapt, and find new expressions as circumstances change and understanding deepens. Maya graduated at the top of her class, her valedictorian speech focusing on the theme of invisible connections and the way that kindness creates ripple effects that touch lives in ways the original giver might never know or understand. Her words carrying an wisdom that suggested she sensed on some level that her success had been built on foundations laid by someone who cared about her welfare without knowing her personally. Someone whose love had taken the form of opportunity rather than affection, support rather than presence, possibility rather than proximity. Standing at the back of the auditorium during the ceremony, Alistair listened to Maya's speech through tears that he didn't try to hide, hearing in her voice the echo of Sophie's laughter, seeing in her confidence the fulfillment of dreams that had been interrupted but not destroyed, recognizing in her character the kind of person his own daughter might have become if fate had been kinder and time more generous with its gifts. That evening, as Maya celebrated with friends and family, as she looked toward a future bright with possibility and purpose, as she packed Isabella carefully in tissue paper for the journey to college, where the doll would continue to serve as a reminder of magic and miracles, and the power of believing in dreams, even when they seem impossible, Alistair sat in his office and wrote a letter he would never send. Words meant for Sophie that expressed everything he had learned about love and loss and the unexpected ways that healing can happen when we open our hearts to new forms of connection and meaning. He wrote about Maya, about the young woman who had unknowingly carried Sophie's promise forward into the world, about the way that grief can be transformed into purpose when we choose to honor our lost loved ones by loving others who need what we have to give, about the recognition that some reunions happen not in physical space but in the spiritual realm, where love transcends individual identity and becomes a force that shapes the world in ways both seen and unseen. The letter filled pages with observations about the mysterious ways that hope survives even the most devastating losses, about how the human capacity for regeneration extends beyond physical healing to include emotional and spiritual restoration that can take years or decades to fully manifest, about the profound truth that love never really dies but simply changes form, finding new expressions and new recipients and new ways of making itself known in a universe that seems designed to test our faith in goodness, but ultimately rewards those who refuse to surrender their belief in the possibility of redemption and renewal. As he wrote, Alistair realized that his relationship with Maya had taught him something crucial about the nature of parental love, something that his grief over Sophie had obscured but not destroyed. That the deepest expression of caring for a child is not possessing them or being acknowledged by them, but creating conditions in which they can flourish and discover their own path to happiness and fulfillment, even if that path leads them far from our immediate influence or awareness. The story that had begun with a broken promise in a hospital room had evolved into something far more complex and beautiful than anyone could have predicted, a narrative that demonstrated the way individual tragedies can be woven into larger patterns of meaning and healing, the way personal loss can become the foundation for someone else's victory, the way love finds a way to express itself even when traditional channels are blocked by death or distance or the practical limitations of human existence. Maya would go on to college, and then to graduate school, and then to a career that would allow her to make the kind of difference in the world that justified all the invisible support and anonymous encouragement that had shaped her path. And she would do so believing in her own merit and potential rather than feeling indebted to a benefactor she had never met, carrying forward the confidence and character that had been nurtured through years of carefully orchestrated opportunities and challenges. Isabella would accompany Maya through all of these transitions, a constant reminder of the night when magic had entered their lives in the form of a stranger's kindness, when dreams had become reality through the mysterious intervention of someone who understood the power of hope and the importance of ensuring that every child has the chance to believe in their own potential. The doll's painted blue eyes would witness Maya's growth from promising student to accomplished professional, from dreamer to achiever, from recipient of anonymous kindness to someone who would inevitably pay that kindness forward to other children who needed to believe in the possibility of miracles and the reality of love that transcends conventional boundaries and expectations. Years later, when Maya had established herself as a pediatric social worker, specializing in helping children navigate the healthcare system, when she had chosen a career that seemed almost cosmically appropriate, given the invisible support that had shaped her own journey through adolescence and young adulthood, she would sometimes find herself thinking about the mysterious benefactor who had changed her family's trajectory with a single act of unprecedented generosity. Working with sick children and their families, she had developed an intuitive understanding of the way that hope and despair dance together in hospital rooms and waiting areas, the way that small gestures can have enormous impact on people who are struggling with circumstances beyond their control, the way that love expresses itself most powerfully through actions rather than words, through presence rather than promises, through consistency rather than grand gestures that fade as quickly as they appear. On particularly difficult days, when Maya encountered families whose situations reminded her of her own childhood struggles, when she saw parents trying to balance impossible choices between financial survival and their children's needs, when she witnessed the kind of quiet desperation that had once characterized her mother's attempts to provide everything Maya needed while maintaining their dignity and independence, she would think about the stranger who had understood exactly what they needed and had provided it without fanfare or expectation of recognition. These moments of reflection had gradually evolved into a personal mission to become for other families what that anonymous angel had been for hers, to use her professional position and personal resources to create opportunities and support systems that would allow children to thrive, regardless of the economic circumstances that had shaped their early experiences. Maya had inherited more than just professional success from her mysterious benefactor. She had absorbed a philosophy of giving that emphasized empowerment over charity, opportunity over handouts, long-term investment in potential over short-term relief of immediate needs. She understood, perhaps better than someone who had never experienced such intervention, that the most effective help is often invisible to its recipients, that dignity is preserved when assistance feels like recognition of merit rather than acknowledgement of need, that the goal of true generosity is to create independence rather than dependence, strength rather than gratitude, confidence rather than obligation. Her approach to social work reflected these principles, as she worked within systems and bureaucracies to create pathways and remove obstacles rather than simply providing temporary solutions to persistent problems. The hospital where Maya worked had established a fund for families facing extended pediatric treatment, a resource that provided not just financial assistance, but comprehensive support, including housing, transportation, meal vouchers, and even small comfort items that could make the difference between despair and hope for children spending weeks or months away from home while fighting for their lives. Maya had been instrumental in designing the program, drawing on her own memories of what it felt like to be a child whose dreams seemed impossibly out of reach, whose family needed help but couldn't ask for it directly, whose potential was limited more by circumstance than by ability or ambition. The fund operated with the same discretion that had characterized her own family's experience, providing assistance that felt like good fortune rather than charity, like recognition of worth rather than acknowledgement of failure. Alistair, now in his